Storage accounts are general purpose file storage in Azure. An Azure Storage account supports 4 different kinds of data. First kind is blobs. So blob is an acronym that stands for binary large object, but blob in general terms has come to mean it doesn't have to be a binary file and it doesn't have to be large. It can just be any kind of file that you want to store that's accessed over HTTPS or using open URLs. Blobs are good to use with applications you might have deployed to Azure. If you have static images, if you have video that you want to stream, you can put them in an Azure Storage account and then access them via URL over HTTPS. Files are another kind of data you can store in Azure Storage. So files are accessed over a protocol called Server Message Block, SMB. This protocol has been around for a long time in Windows. It's the way that Windows clients access data across the network. So file storage allows this sort of file server in the cloud idea for desktop clients. Both blobs and files are covered later in this lesson. Tables are a third kind of data that allow what's called NoSQL database storage. So tables are used typically by developers, not end users. They're covered in another lesson in this course. Queues are the fourth kind. This also is a developer service that provides reliable message passing for applications, ways for applications to pass information between different components. Queues are not covered on your exam, and they're not discussed anymore. When you set up an Azure Storage account, there are several things you specify. I want to call out a few before we look at an example. So the first is performance level. You can choose either standard or premium. Standard uses a hard disk drive, HDD, magnetic drive, to store your data. Premium uses a solid state drive, SSD. So the difference in price, HDDs are less expensive, solid state drives are more expensive. There are other features that do relate to performance, whether you choose standard or premium, but you'll see those in the example video coming up. You also choose an account kind. So the two choices I want to call out are Storage v2 and blob storage. Storage v2 is the current recommendation because it's the most general purpose. It stores all the 4 kinds of data that we discussed, all the 4 kinds of files, blobs, files, tables, and queues. And so it's the most flexible. Blob storage was around since the beginning. There's also an older storage type called Storage v1. Storage v1 supported supported all 4 kinds of data, but it didn't support all the features that blob storage originally supported. And I guess the short version of that is Storage v2 is a combination of the old Storage v1 and blob storage. So it's good just to choose Storage v2 if you're setting up a new storage account. Blob storage could still be used if you want to store just blobs. The third configuration choice I want to call out is replication, how redundant and available your files are. And this will be covered later in this lesson as well, but it's a decision you make up front. You can change in some cases after, but your choice can be restricted based on your original creation choice. So let's look at an example of how to set up a storage account, and you'll see some of these configuration options as we go. To create an Azure Storage account, let's go to the marketplace. Search for storage. Create. Choose a resource group. And scroll down for other choices. The storage account name must be unique everywhere. You can see storage 1 has already been taken by somebody else. I'm trying to find one that no one else has used. Looks like that will work. The region, East US. Performance standard indicates magnetic drive. Premium is solid state drive. If you choose standard, your account kind and replication choices change. So account kind Storage v2 is recommended. It's a combination of earlier versions, both of which are still available with these features. Replication, 6 different choices. Locally redundant means there's 3 copies in the Azure region you specify. Zone redundant means at least one of those copies is in a different data center in the same region. Geo redundant means there are 3 additional copies that are kept in a secondary region that are available for failover if the primary region is offline. Read access to redundant indicates that the secondary copies in that second region are available to you read only at a second URL. GeoZone redundant is a combination of GRS and ZRS, and RA read access to redundant is a combination of RA, GRS, and ZRS. So each one of these in increasing order costs more money, so make your choice carefully. Notice that the default choice is not the least expensive. I'll choose local redundant and go to the networking tab. So by default, your storage account will be visible on the internet. Public endpoint means there'll be a public DNS name and a public IP that will be accessed, used to access your storage. You can have a public DNS and IP, but restrict access to only VNets you specify. Or you can set up what's called a private endpoint. Private endpoint, it essentially projects your storage account onto one of your VNets with a private IP. So make the choice here carefully. You can change this after storage account is created. Let's move on to data protection. There are choices here for point-in-time restore or soft delete for some of the files that are stored in storage accounts. That's just to protect you from accidental deletes or file corruption. On the advanced tab, notice that HTTPS is enabled by default. That's a good thing. And also enabled is blob public access, which means that you can allow optionally anonymous read access to your blobs. If you disable this, there will be no anonymous read access to any of your blobs. Realize even if this is enabled, you can still restrict access to specific blobs or blob containers. So you'll have a choice over whether to allow anonymous access to those. Also notice the default access tier is hot, which means the blob is always available. But the default can be changed for any given blob. So those I think are reasonable choices to start with. At this point, we can review and create. Doesn't take long to create a storage account. In other videos, we'll look at how to create and manage blobs and files in storage accounts. To wrap up this lesson, I want to discuss a couple of concepts related to security around storage accounts. Every storage account has two access keys. You can see access keys listed here. An access key provides full control access to storage. So anyone who has this access key can change anything in any of your storage account, any kind of data. So of course, you handle these access keys very carefully. Typically, they're only given to developers. They're integrated into the application. The web app is when maybe access files from storage. In fact, in the screenshot you see here, the connection string is the thing you would probably copy and paste and give to the developer. It contains information about the name of your storage account and also contains the access key itself. So if your web application is already running trusted code written by you, your company, and so it makes sense that you would provide full control access to storage for the application the customer might be using access files. You may not want to give full control access to in certain situations. And so the restricted access that's provided by the Azure portal and by Azure actually is what's called a shared access signature. This provides custom access to files or storage services that you decide. And SAS has several factors about it that are important to call out. It has a start time and an end time. So it provides access to a file, but only between the start and end times. A shared access signature also can be restricted to specific IP addresses. So you can allow access to files maybe from people if they're accessing files on-prem from your network at the office, but you don't provide general access from people outside the office. A shared access signature is signed with an access key. So that's how we know that it wasn't modified after it was given or used by the user. And typically, a shared access signature is just appended to a URL, maybe on a web page, maybe on a link, maybe an email that you might send to a client that has a web URL in it. So by appending this string of characters to the end of a URL to, let's say, a blob, then you can indicate in there when the person who has this link has access to this blob by start and end time, where they have to be, and then you prevent tampering with the access key signature. Typically, these are also something that you just end up putting in web access code or web app code. And so you can generate them in the Azure portal. And an example demo we'll see later in this lesson shows you how to do that. But usually developers are involved in using shared access signatures if you want to provide customers or users specific kinds of access, maybe just read-only access, or maybe create access but not modify access to a specific file. So next we'll discuss how to implement blob storage and then file storage. And so we'll dig into some of the details of how you use those services and how some of these security features are integrated.